Just before midnight on July 22, 1991, Tracy Edwards flagged down police in sheer terror. He had a pair of handcuffs dangling from one wrist and led the responding officers back to the man who had just tried to kill him. When officers stepped inside apartment 213, they found a scene that defied explanation. Human remains were cooking on the stove. There were severed heads in the refrigerator and blue barrels filled with acid on the floor. Over 13 years, the man living in this completely ordinary building had murdered and dismembered 17 men and boys. He had done it all while hiding in plain sight. To his neighbors and coworkers, Jeffrey Dahmer was quiet and polite. He was a standard, unassuming employee pulling graveyard shifts at the local Ambrosia chocolate factory. Even when the police finally caught him, he did not fight back. He offered no resistance or manic outbursts, surrendering immediately with the calm realization that his killing spree was finally over. Criminal psychologists who later examined him identified a slow, methodical psychological escalation behind his actions. To understand this level of depravity, we must look past the myth of the born monster and examine the decades-long process of becoming that desensitized his mind. The groundwork for Dahmer's psychology began with a biological predisposition. Both of his parents struggled heavily with clinical depression, introducing a hereditary chemical component to his early development. The biological traits were reinforced by a deeply isolated childhood. He grew up in a home marked by constant parental fighting, culminating in his mother abruptly leaving the state and leaving Dahmer entirely alone at 17. Lacking the skills to communicate his sense of abandonment, he developed a disturbing childhood hobby. He began collecting roadkill, dissecting the animals, and bleaching their bones, a trauma response that allowed him to establish a sense of control. These dark adolescent fantasies crossed into reality in June 1978, just weeks after his high school graduation. Dahmer brought an 18-year-old hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks back to his empty house for a drink. When Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer panicked at the prospect of another abandonment. He struck Hicks from behind with a barbell, strangling him. Dahmer found that a dead body provided the total control he lacked in his childhood. A corpse was a partner that could never reject him or leave him behind. Dahmer did not commit another murder for nearly a decade, but during this 9-year incubation period, his internal obsessions continued to deepen. He satisfied his urges by tracking obituaries and attending the funerals of young men. At night, he would return to the quiet cemeteries, digging up bodies to have sex with the corpses. Dahmer was diagnosed as a sociopath, a profile prioritizing emotional compulsions over pure sadism. His pathology was rooted in a profound fear of abandonment. He sought a dead zone where he possessed complete control and faced zero risk of rejection. His crimes focused entirely on the permanent possession of his victims. He utilized murder as a functional mechanism to ensure they could never leave him. When Dahmer resumed killing in Milwaukee in 1987, the compulsion had become an uncontrollable, horrific addiction. He was highly calculated in selecting his victims, deliberately targeting marginalized young men of color. He operated on the assumption that the disappearances of people from vulnerable populations would not be heavily investigated by the police. His methods for achieving permanent possession escalated into the grotesque. He preserved his victims' skulls, began consuming their flesh, and even injected acid into their heads in a bizarre attempt to create a compliant companion. One of the most infamous failures in the case occurred in May 1991, when a bleeding, drugged 14-year-old victim managed to escape. Neighbors called the police, but officers returned the child to Dahmer after believing his calm lies. Following Dahmer's arrest, public anger erupted in Milwaukee. Communities pointed to systemic biases that allowed a killer to operate in plain sight without police scrutiny. His ability to continue for 13 years was a result of his unremarkable facade and a deeply flawed system that failed to look closer at the disappearances he caused. By the summer of 1991, his mind was entirely consumed by his compulsion. He grew so brazen that he began carrying a victim's mummified skull in his locker at the chocolate factory. During his arrest and trial, Dahmer appeared almost relieved. He recognized that his intellect had finally lost the battle to his obsession. In 1994, while serving 15 light sentences, Dahmer was attacked by a fellow inmate named Christopher Scarver. He offered no resistance, allowing himself to be beaten to death. Before his death, he acknowledged that his life was a waste and admitted he was far too dangerous to ever be free, as his compulsions could never be stopped. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer remains a chilling reminder that extreme evil is rarely born overnight. It is the end result of untreated trauma and profound isolation that slowly and completely